I started really when I joined the faculty at Bentley University in 1986. I was an assistant to the Center for Business Ethics and an adjunct professor there. I stayed at Bentley for 15 years, eventually a tenured associate professor. Continued to work at the Center for Business Ethics, which I'll talk more about as we go on. While at the center, I helped, along with many other people, helped to create the Ethics Officer Association, as it was then called. And before that, I worked with Mike Hoffman at the center to run the national conferences on business ethics in the late 80s and into the 90s. I stayed with the Ethics Officer Association for a number of years, became its executive director, served in that capacity for 10 years. While at the EOA, I also served for 3 years on the advisory panel to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which was involved in revamping those standards. Worked with the conference board on its business ethics conferences for about 15 years. And then I left the EOA, or by then it was called the Ethics and Compliance Officer Association. I left that and went into consulting in 2005, and I retired from consulting just this year.
Thank you for that background, Ed. And as I listen to you, I am again awed by the magnitude of your contributions to this field. What brought you to the field of ethics and compliance in the first place? You started your story by saying you were an adjunct professor at Bentley. How'd you get involved? How'd you get interested? What brought you to this field?
Well, like many people early on in business ethics, it wasn't something I planned. I was a newly minted Ph.D. in philosophy, looking for a job in New England, landed a job at Bentley College, which is a business school. So Mike Hoffman, who was the chair of the department, asked me if I could teach a course in business ethics. I had never heard of such a thing, but I, of course, said absolutely, and bought his book and then just tried to stay a chapter ahead. And that was pretty much my introduction to business ethics. And then working at the center with Mike and Bob Frederick and Judy Cam was really an education for me in business ethics. And that's really where I got the start. And anything that I've done subsequent in business ethics was really because of that start at the center with Mike.
So let's talk about Mike Hoffman a little bit. Sadly, he died before we had the chance to interview him as part of this project. And it is really just something that is a little gap in our work. And we would just love to hear you talk a little bit about Mike and some of his contributions to the field.
Sure. Mike started at Bentley, again, as a professor of philosophy. And being that he was at a business school, he thought, what could I do here that would make a difference? He thought about starting a center for the study of business ethics. There were very few academic centers like that starting up. This was 1976, but there weren't many. It was very new as an idea. It was mostly devoted at the time to leadership, governance, and the environment. Those were what was really sparking it. There had been some scandals, some coming out of Watergate around business corruption and bribery. And that's what really started it. He got the initial funding for the center. And I think what was his initial contribution and what really paid dividends over the years was that he made an effort to involve not just academics, but business leaders and government leaders. So he was hosting the National Conference on Business Ethics there. There was also the Conference Board was doing conferences. There was a conference out in Long Beach, California, and there were a few others. But the conferences at Bentley in the 80s were bringing together business leaders, government leaders, and academics. And that was a great mix. So there was a lot of cross-pollination going on, and they were really talking about ideas about how to include an ethical point of view into business decisions. And Mike was behind all of that. Mike had his foot in every camp. You know, he was one of the founders of the Society for Business Ethics, so he had his academic credentials and his friends there. But he was fearless. He managed to bring in CEOs. He would call up a CEO and just tell him what he was doing and invite him to a conference. And sure enough, they would show up. And so if you go back to those early conferences, it was really remarkable who he managed to get there. And then he fostered a dialogue between them all. And that made it possible for the Ethics Officer Association, which came in the early 90s. And I'm happy to talk more about that if you like.
And we will talk more about that because, of course, that's how you and I know each other. I was a member of EOA and a member of the board and had a chance to work closely with you through those years. I want to ask one more question about Mike because I heard him tell this story quite a lot, and maybe you did too. And maybe you can sort of summarize it for us. He talked about one of the first grants that he got from the I think it was the National Endowment for the Humanities. And he had filed a grant application. He got a reject letter. And he said, well, this I don't even understand. And he went down to Washington to visit the administrator in person to explain why they ought to fund his project. Am I remembering some of that correctly?
You are. And the rejection simply said that there was no such field as business ethics. And his argument was exactly, and that's why it's needed. So yeah, it was, as I said, it was the very early days, and there were the jokes, you know, that business ethics was an oxymoron, and business ethics, the shortest book, in the world. You know, there were all those jokes, and and he was a pioneer along with a handful of other people in academia who saw this as a real need and saw the opportunity to sort of bring what he knew as a philosopher and bring it to bear on the issues that were facing business leaders. And that was the idea behind it all, really.
I can still picture him with the emotion as he tells the story many, many, many years later about sitting in front of the administrator at NEH, who I guess actually admitted to not fully even reading what he wanted to have funded, and being, at least in Mike's telling of it, a tad embarrassed that he or she had.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And now years later, there are dozens and dozens of centers, all doing their own great work. And the Center for Business Ethics continues. It continues. It houses a library where scholars come from all over the world. It continues its focus on supporting students who have an interest in business ethics. But it's still a place that tries to bring together academics, government leaders, and business leaders.
And now it's named after Mike. So now
that's right. That's right. A great honor for him, and well deserved, of course.
The Michael W. Hoffman Center for Business Ethics at Bentley University, I think, is the way that whole title goes.
That sounds right.
All right, great. So there you are working with Mike. There you are at Bentley. There you are, one chapter ahead of your class. At the beginning, what did you expect to accomplish? And as you learned a little bit more about this field and had a chance to work with Mike, did you have some goals at the start? And did you realize them?
Well, my main goal at the time was to get tenure. And that was the motivator. Since business ethics was the vehicle at Bentley to do that, that was, to be perfectly honest, that was my motivation. But as I started to meet the folks who were involved in business ethics in the early days, it was really a great group of people, and I became good friends with so many of them, and I really began to understand the challenges that they faced, and particularly the business leaders. in trying to bring and maintain an ethical point of view when dealing with very difficult situations and sometimes not fully supportive C-suite leadership. So, that was the challenge, and those were the individuals that I think really showed me that I was where I needed to be. And so a lot of circumstances came together at that point that worked well.
And that's good to hear. And we're going to talk more about EOA and your work there. I'm also curious because Mike was such a force at Bentley. You joined him, and the two of you together really drove this center forward and drove this partnership between government, business, and academia forward in so many different ways. What did the university think about all of this? Obviously, they gave you tenure. Obviously, Mike had the support of the university. Did the university continuously support and celebrate this effort?
They did, and to their credit. And back then, it was Bentley College. It was a fairly small but growing business college outside of Boston. And they, I believe, were convinced by Mike that this is where they needed to be, and it was a niche that they could fill. And I think they were wowed, as was everyone else, by the people that Mike was able to bring on campus. And I think that that galvanized the support from one administration after another, who supported Mike and the center. And that continues to this day. That's why the center is still there. I do also want to add, Gretchen, that although I was one of Mike's assistants, Bob Frederick, who was a professor of philosophy, was also very much involved and became the editor of the journal that came out of all of this. Judy Cam, who was in the management department, was also she was, I think, the associate director of the center at that time. And there was a group called the Dryford Group, which was a consulting firm led by Craig Dreilinger and Fred Tietz, who worked very closely with Mike on a lot of the efforts in the late 80s and early 90s. So there was a lot of folks involved. And when we turn to the beginning of the EOA, and I think of some of the early ethics officers who really saw this as a need and an opportunity, and they, as much as anybody, were really responsible for what happened next.
So quickly tell us a little bit about the journal, and then let's turn to the development of the EOA.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't say much about the journal. That was I didn't have much to do with that. I think it still is publishing. It was published someplace else before coming to Bentley. You may know more about it than I do, but let me take a pass on that.
Okay, that's fine. Let's jump into the EOA then. Sure, and tell us about that.
Yeah, so there we were holding these national conferences, which I think we did 10 of them when they were beginning to get a little dated. But at that time, we knew about the sentencing guidelines, which were first not focused on business ethics and organizations, but there was rumor that was coming next. A fellow named Jeff Kaplan, who was an attorney out of New York, was involved and very influential in kind of letting us know that, look, this was something coming and we needed to be on top of it. So in 1991, Mike decided to host a meeting at Bentley for every ethics officer that we could find. And there were about 30 that showed up. And they then decided, and the meeting was hosted by Mike and the Dryford Group. That group of early ethics officers then decided they needed a peer organization to share best practices. And then they, over the next year, they put together an organization, did all the work that's needed to create bylaws and to make it all legal. And then they launched the EOA in 1992, and they picked Bentley to really house it and to administer the operation. But the early ethics officers were Graydon Wood from what's now Verizon, then was Navex, New York Telephone, Paul Town at Honeywell, Shirley Peterson at Northrop Grumman, and there were others in that first batch, and then very soon after that, a few years later, Gretchen, you joined the EOA, Kerry Penman, Keith Darcy came a little later, but there was this core group who really saw the value in meeting on a regular basis to share knowledge. And it was essential because none of them had any background in this. It was a new field. Most of them had been picked from some operational job before that. Most of them were vice presidents who had been in the organization for a long time. So they needed that both ideas from others and also social support, because it was a tough job and many of them were alone in their organizations. So that was really why the EOA started, and it was then called the Ethics Officer Association. That's why it started. Mike asked me to be sort of the go-to gopher on it. I was the assistant. My title was something like assistant to the board or something like that. Mike was the executive director. And then when Mike stepped down in 1994, that's when I became the executive director of the EOA. And by then there were probably 100 members. And by the time I left, there were 1,300. And it grew rapidly. Part of the impetus for all of that growth was the sentencing guidelines, which Jeff Kaplan had given us a heads up on, and the sentencing guideline for organization, which required that organizations, if they wanted to receive credit in the event that they had some wrongdoing at the organization, if they wanted to receive credit against the fine, they had to have an ethics and compliance program, and part of that included having an ethics officer. So that really got the attention of corporations in a way that hadn't been the case before, and that's what really sparked the creation of these positions across the board. And EOA just happened to be the only game in town at the time that if you were a newly appointed ethics officer, the EOA is what you did. You joined the EOA to learn from your peers. And that was the heady days of the early EOA in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, that was certainly the message that I received when I was named the ethics officer at Baxter. EOA is the game, right? Get there, be a part of it, find a peer group, because we all were, as you say, kind of alone in our roles and responsibilities. And it was great to have the support and the education that EOA provided. So as the organization grew and evolved, did the goals and objectives of the organization change?
They did. What didn't change is we were always about maintaining the network and always try to create opportunities for ethics officers to learn from each other. So conferences and other such things were the natural. I think what changed was the focus and the mix of individuals who became ethics officers. And part of that goes back to those sentencing guidelines, which, though I don't think there was anything else that could have given the ethics officer movement a jump start like the sentencing guidelines did. That lit it on fire. But it also planted the seeds for changes that went on for years to come. Because when we hitched our star to the sentencing guidelines, we really became, the compliance office really became an extension of law enforcement in many ways. And that also meant that the initiative for any change and for any innovation was coming from not us, not academia, but from government and government changes. And that I think, sapped a little energy from the movement. It certainly replaced that internal energy with growth, which was phenomenal. But we were growing without any real internal spark of new ideas. We were just following the guidelines after that. And that meant also a very distinct turn towards compliance and law and compliance. I mean, that's obvious from the mix of individuals who became ethics officers. Very few of the early ethics officers had a legal background. Almost all of them did later. Very few of the positions were within the law department. Most of them were later or had a close working relationship with legal. And that I think was a significant change in the focus of the organization and the focus of ethics officers. And one example, really a couple of examples here, but the whole idea of ethics and culture, whereas that was the primary focus early on, years later, when we talked about ethics and culture, it really was just to improve ethics and culture as a way of making compliance more efficient. But it was always about compliance, and that I think was a significant shift as time went on.
So, I love this conversation. Is it ethics? Is it compliance? What's the difference? What do you call it? What you call it matters. I care a lot about those conversations, and I know you do too. As you reflect on the early years, the change that you described, your service on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, where those concepts were embedded in a later revision of the sentencing guidelines, and then your time as a consultant. I'd love to hear you just expand on that and talk a little bit about where you think that's going.
Yeah, it's how it's a complicated saga, and I think that the general trajectory is that when we first started, it was all about trying to help leaders and business leaders think about things from an ethical point of view, and that is, what is the impact of this decision on others, and how can we mitigate harm? That was the beginning, but then it became, as the sentencing guidelines took hold, it became more about what do I need to do to set up a program that will pass muster if our organization ever is in trouble, and oh yes, it would be great if that program also helped individuals make decisions and helped us stay out of trouble. But there was that shift in emphasis, and really, as we talked about, the sentencing guidelines and the change in 2004, one of the big changes was to bring in the concept of culture into the discussion, which was already there in business leadership circles, but that was to bring it in, and there was a lot of pushback at the Sentencing Commission because it was too vague a term. What does that mean? How do we decide whether or not a corporation that's in trouble and is facing fines, how does anyone decide if they have an adequate culture? It was too wishy-washy, too vague. And so what ended up happening is that, to give that more substance and meat, it became more and more of a checklist, because a checklist is something that can be ascertained. So every effort that was made, to try to bring ethics, culture, those sorts of issues back into the field, had to again meet the muster of compliance. And so compliance was always where things pivoted back around. Now, in recent years, there's ethics has not gone away. There's still plenty of discussion about ethics. It's just not leading the movement going forward. And I think, and I mentioned this earlier, I think the other thing that's happened is If you look at a conference schedule today, conference agenda today, and compared it to a conference agenda from 10, 15 years ago, it's really the same topics being discussed, which to me means things are a bit stagnant. And that's partly because the compliance framework hasn't changed. And so that's still what drives a lot of the discussion. But I'll give you one example. When the ethics officer position was created back in those early days in the 90s, it was thought of as an experiment. No one was sure at all that it was the right way to go. There was serious debate that by assigning ethics officers, this might lift the responsibility for ethics from other leaders, because they would always say, no, that person, Gretchen is covering ethics. I don't have to worry about it. That was one of the reasons why we said, well, let's try it and see. I don't think there's been any serious debate in recent years as to whether it's working, and whether or not there's maybe a different approach that should be taken. Instead, it's a lot of nuts and bolts. It's a lot of which vendor is selling the best helpline, or who has the best library for video training. It's that sort of thing now, rather than the discussion about whether we're even moving in the right direction.
So Ed, you have an academic background. We haven't talked about your academic work or your academic background. So fill us in a little bit on that. And then tell us a little bit about how academia has contributed to the development of this field, or what its absence in recent years, as I think you've hinted at, has meant, and whether there's an opportunity in the future for academics who study business ethics to reinvigorate this stagnant field.
Sure. My background was in philosophy. That's my doctorate's in philosophy. I was studying the philosophy of Charles Sanders Peirce, who was a 19th century American philosopher, expected to teach at a research university and teach grad students about Peirce, but things take a turn. And so, my academic focus was really, working with Mike and the others at the center. Once I left Bentley and went on to the EOA, I kept up my ties with the academic community as best I could, but I wouldn't call myself at that point an academic anymore. I moved on to more of a administrator of the program. I think what I found is that the critical role of the academic community early on was, of course, they were the leaders in the launch of business ethics. And then in the early stages, they served as its chief critic. They were the gadflies. They were the ones who questioned whether or not this was the right approach, and questioned the ideas, and provided opposing viewpoints. I don't see that happening as much now as I wish it would. I think some of the I wish there was a more of a serious engagement from academics with business leaders from a critical point of view. But I don't see that. I think it's an opportunity, and I think it's a real need for someone to step into that gadfly role, to begin to question some of the assumptions of business ethicists today.
Hey, you're retired now, you said. Maybe that's an opportunity.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think others it's time for others to pick that up. Not me.
Wonderful. So as you reflect back on all the things that you have done, of what are you most proud? Talk a little bit about pride points, if you will.
I mean, overwhelmingly, when I look back, it's the it's the friendships that I made over the years and the people that I met. It's you, it's Pat, it's so many others, you know, Bill Redgate, Pat Rogers, Patty Ellis, you know, Carrie, Keith. I shouldn't have even started listing names because there's so many that I've just left off, but that's it. And when you pivot and say, well, it's, you know, those were all personal friendships, but they were also it was a professional network. And so to the extent that I had any role early on in helping to you know, foster the creation of that network, and a lot of it was just getting out of the way and letting folks gather at conferences where they could meet with one another and you know, and form peer groups. That's what I'm most proud of. And I mean, that still exists. You know, the Ethics Officer Association became the Ethics and Compliance Officer Association, and it then got folded into the Ethics Initiative, the Ethics Resource Center under Pat Werhane. So it's
Pat Harned.
Pat Harned. Oh, sorry, Pat. Yes, Pat Harned. So it's still there, and that network is still vital, and that far and away is what I've been most proud of.
You know what? I remember the conversations that we had. I was on the board. I think I was chairing the board when we moved from EOA to ECOA. That was a really lengthy, deep, philosophical debate. You and I chatted often about what it meant to move from the name of the organization EOA to ECOA and what it might mean for the future deliberations and actions of that.
And I think at the time it probably seemed like we were making an awful lot over an awful little, you know, but it's because we all saw what that signified and the shift that it meant. And it was a significant shift. And it certainly, as I said, undoubtedly it facilitated the growth, tremendous growth in the movement. But at the same time, we lost something. And that was the, you know, and another thing, you know, along those same lines, before I retired, when I was talking with ethics officers, so much of their time is now spent parsing databases and data mining and, you know, reviewing surveys and backroom operations that are so far removed from the personal contact with employees. And I think they're overwhelmed often by the responsibilities that they have, which have little or nothing to do with person-to-person contact. And so, you know, it's become very depersonalized, which maybe that was part of what happened when it took the compliance turn. But I think also things, you know, more and more automated, whether it's the helpline that's farmed out to a vendor or the training, which is done online, or the, you know, the data mining and the surveys. It's all become a bit removed from the face-to-face, which I know some makes me sound antiquated, but really sometimes the best when a leader a business leader is faced with an ethical dilemma, sometimes the best thing an ethics officer can do is just go visit. You know, that's also post-COVID or whatever, but go visit, talk to them, talk it through. There's no substitute for that. And that's lacking these days.
So if you were going to cast your mind forward, Ed, for another 20 years.
Betsy, can I introduce you? Just one question I have which has to do with this before.
Sure. Yes.
And that is, Ed, you remember that Mike Hoffman argued again and again and again that ethics officers should report to the CEO or to the board. And of course, as we know, that very seldom happens. What is your view of that?
Yeah, you know, to me, and I told Mike this at the time, it wasn't so important who they reported to, as long as whoever that was had clout and also had a sympathetic ear. So if it's the general counsel, if the general counsel, for instance, quote unquote, got it, and understood, and if the general counsel was the one who talked to the CEO, then that was fine. Sometimes, reporting to the board, and that was one thing that Mike argued, that can sometimes backfire. If the ethics officer is reporting to the board, then that can make them less engaged with management. I served for a while on the ethics oversight committee for the U.S. Olympics, and when I was doing that, we were so far removed from the day to day. We reported to the board, but our only connection back to the actual running of the USOC was through the compliance officer. So I think, long story short, but I think the reporting channel is who they report to is less important than they report to somebody who gets it and somebody who has the clout to follow up.
Okay.
Whoever that is in the particular organization,
Good, thank you. I wanted to get that in before we went on to the next.
No, it's a big question. Yeah.
It is a big question. And Pat, I was going to turn to you and ask if you had other thoughts or questions about what we've talked about so far. So if you have others that you'd like to pose now, please do.
I think that Ed's done a wonderful job in filling us in and answering a lot of great questions. So thank you. And I know Gretchen has the futures, we call it the futures question.
The futures question indeed. So as you've talked about the past and sort of set that up for us, we'd like you to cast your mind forward just a little bit and say a few words about what the future of ethics and compliance, if you will. What does it look like to you?
Sure. I think one interesting development is the growth in recent years of what we called just a short time ago corporate social responsibility. Now it's ethics, governance, and sustainability, or goes by a variety of names. And I think this is hopeful. I know if you think back to the very early days, back when Mike founded the center, governance, leadership, and the environment were the main causes that we were talking about back then. And then it became much more granular as we talked about a short set of topics that are sort of under the purview of the compliance officer. And then slowly we try to expand back again and say, the compliance officer has responsibilities beyond this short list of topics. But that was a struggle. And so now it's sort of been an end round of the compliance officer, and we've had these corporate social responsibility issues becoming dominant, and the compliance officer is sort of being dragged into more of an alignment on those topics. So it of course worries me if it's just a matter of greenwashing and there's not any real substance, but it also, I think, is an opportunity to broaden the scope of the Ethics and Compliance Office to bring in some of these larger issues of business purpose, of societal impact, governance, leadership, and the environment again. One quick story on this. I know in the 90s when I was at the EOA, there was this other organization called Businesses for Social Responsibility. They were huge. And they were growing at the same time we were. And we had no connection between us. And we tried. We reached out. We tried to have a connection. I was invited to their conference. They were invited to ours. And it just never got traction because they were just looking at different issues, different solutions. And our group in the ethics and compliance community were more inwardly focused on a short list of topics and their programs, and they just weren't talking the same language. That's beginning to change now, and I think that's a plus. and is encouraging. Oh, I've lost your audio, Gretchen.
Sorry. You are reminding me of the BSR conferences I went to, one of them in, the year that Enron's stock price dropped. The Enron people were there, and it was just a wild ride there for the couple days that we were in. I think we were in Seattle at the time. And I remember being with you on a panel at a Society for Business Ethics conference in Denver, where we talked about this very issue. Are these things the same? Are they different? Will they come together? How should they come together? That was a long time ago.
It was, and now now it's happening for reasons we could never have guessed, but it's beginning.
And some of the things that I guess I'm seeing, and I'd love to hear you comment on, I think I could envision, and I think I heard you say that you would envision maybe a time where the ethics office might be the umbrella for these various efforts. And I guess what I'm seeing in real life, based on conversations with other ethics officers, is that that's just not the case.
Right.
Risk or ESG or CSR becomes the umbrella, and ethics is a subpoint.
Right.
And I'd love to hear your observations on that and to hear you comment.
Yeah, well, that turf battles aside, that could be fine. I know it all depends on who that risk officer is. Again, and as long as that risk officer has an understanding of what the ethics officer is all about and has that as a priority, then I do see a blended approach of ethics, governance, sustainability as that could be a good approach, and by putting it under some type of risk function, that's a way to ensure that it's going to maintain the interest and support and leverage with with senior leadership. So that's a possibility. It may mean the end of the ethics and compliance officer as we know it, but that if it transforms into something better, that would be a good outcome.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to speculate. It truly is. Pat, any other questions? And then Tom will turn to you.
I don't think so, but what I hear you saying is that ethics has been more or less put to the side because and compliance and risk analysis are taking hold. And I think, of course, obviously from my point of view, I think that's a real shame, but I think we're missing some great opportunities there. I think you probably would agree.
Yes, I would. Yep.
Yeah.
And there's fewer and fewer folks who are in a position to even have that discussion, a meaningful discussion about ethics, and that's that's another role for for academics, if they could.
You've outlined an opportunity for young academics, it seems to me. Tom.
Yes, I hope so.
Well, Ed, I think you've had a fascinating career. I'd love to hear more about the Christmas trees too, but I know we don't have time for that. The one thing I always want to know about on this is would be the what I call the quis custodies quandary. How do you have oversight of your membership in the EOA or EI or whatever it is now, in the sense that, I mean, there must have been times, there has to have been some instances of infarctions of codes, etc., that either members have been witness to, or organizers. Do you have forms of sanction? Do you have can you disbar people? It's that conflict of interest when you're embedded.
Well, interesting, because we did debate that over the years, and where we landed, at least back in when I was there, is that the EOA was for organizations that had problems, and that so it would be very hypocritical of us if, when an organization ran into trouble, if we sanctioned them or threw them out. We were their support, so we were where they would come and talk about the issues, talk about their failings, and receive, the support and ideas for moving forward. So, so in fact, there was hardly a member in our organization who wasn't a sinner. Every corporation had some problems, some worse than others, but all were welcome.
Absolutely. Did they all have the same spirit in that, or were there more cynical?
I wish I could say that they all had that same spirit, but some, it wasn't. Especially as we grew, it was inevitable that some were joining for the wrong reason. But inevitably, those folks who joined for the wrong reason didn't participate, didn't last. Their programs perhaps faded, or that person was replaced by someone who was more engaged. We saw that quite a bit. So, and it was also, I have to say, the group itself was so engaging, and the other ethics officers were so engaging that even if someone joined the association for the wrong reason, just to check a box, when they came to a conference, they were often won over, and they often said, geez, I can do more with this position than I ever imagined, and I want to. So that happened too. That happened as well. Yeah.
Which stage? Just one last question. Which stage do you find most challenging? Was it the initial trying to get credence for what you were trying to do? Was it when it grew and was transforming its nature to be more embracive of other disciplines?
The early stage was, in fact, the easiest, because there was such a need, and so many people just were eager to work together to a common cause to get this up and running. That was easy. That was just I was along for the ride there, because it was off and running. Then as it began to get larger, of course, like any organization, you had the administrative issues that became more overwhelming, and there was a lot of decisions that had to be made on where we put our priorities, and that became more difficult, and I think at that point. That's when I left the EOA, because it was clear at that point that they needed someone with business acumen, that could make the business argument to the board, for why we needed more staff, or could make the business argument about what our research approach should be, or what our partnership goals should be with other organizations. And these were all administrative business decisions that needed a businessman or woman, and that's what happened. Do you think
that was for your organization? Do you think that was a tipping point for business ethics as a discipline as a whole?
I wouldn't. I think it corresponded with a time when there was a lot going on. I'm not sure that it was the tipping point, but certainly that was a time. In the early 2000s when a lot was going on in the industry. So I think I would look at it more that way, that it was a time of change in the movement, not necessarily that it was the EOA at that point was no longer in a position to really be the leverage point. But there was a lot else going on at the time.
And just finally, because I know I'm aware of time, but did that have a corresponding change in, say, the academic practice of business ethics as well, do you think?
I at that point had been out of academia for a while, so I could only comment on that, what I was seeing at the EOA about academics. And what I was seeing was that they, in their journals and at their meetings, which I tried to go to for a while, it was so arcane, and they were talking about things that really often didn't have any relevance to what I knew my members in the EOA were facing, and so they became less and less engaged. And when there was centers that were still, working, those centers tended to be more retreats for CEOs who would go and, and talk among like-minded people for a week and then come back refreshed, but not much else. And so, it was hard to get an academic to the EOA or even the conference board conferences who would offer any kind of meaningful critique of what we all were doing. And I'll give you one other example. Even when there was an effort to try to engage with the academic community on surveys, let's say, to finally get some information on trends. What the business community wanted was a quick turnaround. They wanted to know a result in, say, a matter of weeks or months. But the academics saw this as an opportunity to do some meaningful research, which would take a year or more. And the ethics officers couldn't wait. And so that exacerbated the disconnect that the data they would eventually get was great, but they needed it last year. There's always different processes, different goals, and they grew apart.
Well, thank you.
Ed, this has been fascinating. I want to ask a final question myself and then ask you to sort of fill in the blanks. If there's something you came here to tell us and we haven't gotten to it, I want to make sure that you have the chance to do that. My question for you is really about specific CEOs and specific companies that in your experience have over the years really gotten this, have decided that ethics is a fundamental part of their culture and the way that they do business, and it's built into their values, and CEO messaging is more than lip service or check the box. Is there anyone that stands out in your mind as either an individual or an organization that's been able to maintain that focus and really bake it into the culture? And I'm just curious because you've seen a lot,
Yeah, I'm not going to name a specific corporation, but it's the defense industry. And they have, and that may shock some folks who see this, but they were one of the early leaders back in the 80s, and they have consistently had some of the most influential folks serving as ethics and compliance officers. They were leaders in innovation early on and still are. And for a variety of reasons, their organizations tended to take these matters very seriously. As government contractors, they had that clout, and they had a great organization, for peer support called the Defense Industry Initiative, the DII, which still works. And so I would say consistently over the years, and I'm talking 40 years now, the defense industry has quietly been the leaders in the in-house ethics movement. And I think still is today.